But let's talk about Jannik Sinner now, because
Mm,
we do need to mention, Chris, the
yes.
the D word, drugs, doping,
I thought you said
um,
Diet Coke. I thought you were going to
Diet
say.
Coke. No, not Diet Coke. You know, the last time we spoke about Jannik Sinner in depth
Mm.
was around the
It had
fact that,
just happened, hadn't it?
yeah, it had just happened.
That day.
Testing positive for a banned substance twice in March. Didn't sit out. Kind of continued on the tour.
Hmm.
And yeah, the news broke prior to the US Open. Um, he's now in the final.
Mm.
What what's your view now that we've had sort of 2 weeks past?
Mm.
How should we be feeling about Jannik Sinner, as I say, being in the US Open final, on the verge of winning another Grand Slam title,
Hmm.
but as I say, the fact that there's this controversy kind of still clouding him, and it feels like just dividing and polarizing opinion in the tennis community.
It is, and it is kind of snowballing again in terms of the attention around it. And obviously, that would be happening when a player does make such a deep run at this sort of a tournament. I think everything that he's going to say about it has been said, in terms of the fact that he knows that he didn't do anything wrong. And I think that's something where, if you are a Yannick Sinner fan, you can definitely say very comfortably that that is likely in this case. But the
Mm,
issue that comes in here, and the reason why this isn't going away, is because of the difference in treatment that people believe that Yannick
yeah.
Sinner had versus other people in similar circumstances. And actually, Medvedev was particularly insightful on this earlier in the tournament when he said, well, it kind of all works quite well when you're able to get those suspensions. When he had the two tests, he got notified and he had very small suspensions, which he appealed. And then he was allowed to compete. And he said it works well when you are able to explain how it happened, and there is a story that you can tell the authorities around it. But if you are contaminated and genuinely contaminated, you might not actually know what it is that's done it. In the Simona Halep case, for example, or when it is contaminated meat, you might not know what exactly is at fault or be able to prove it. So that is where lots of questions do arise, where there is a luxury of being able to explain it. But the problem with being able to explain it is that there are many questions about whether this is correct.
Mm.
So it's more of a legal issue than it is a moral issue. In terms of lots of people like Nadal have said that they trust him, they trust the player. I think that Federer also says that as well. And that's all well and good. But the issue here is that you have to prove not only that you weren't at fault or negligence as the player, but also the team. And the team are an extension of you as a player. And this is where it gets messy, because contamination is ultimately the only way you can prove that neither of you knew. But in this case, they're trying to say that both the pharmacist and the physio didn't know about clostabol and the fact that it was banned. And that is where you get into a real sticking point, because it's so prevalent in Italy. It's such a big thing with all
Mm.
of these scandals that have happened in other sports. So you can't really say he was inadvertently contaminated and that the physio bore
Yeah.
no fault there. And the fact that this was accepted, is actually the most concerning part, because even if the physio um, kind of didn't mean to, but was aware of it, that's a 2-year ban. So that's where the issue is. It's around the
Mm.
fairness of how this has been interpreted and the fact that he was allowed to play. And I think um, there are some comments by Federer as well, where he says the frustration is that has he been treated the same as others? And the fact that he was able to obviously compete during this process, avoid the suspension after the two failed tests. So I think that's probably the best way we can summarize it, that Yannick Sinner is unlikely to bear any form of, obviously you're responsible what your team do, but the negligence side of things doesn't fall on Yannick Sinner in this case. It very much is a case that his team are probably the reason why he should have been,
Mm.
if the rules were interpreted by a different player who didn't have the legal sort of weight that Yannick Sinner had. That would be the reason he would have been suspended.
Yeah, and he is living with these consequences now. I think we, as tennis fans, kind of see it online, we see it in the comments on his matches, and it is quite clear. I think that it's been very kind of polarizing amongst fans, but as I say, also amongst players, because you've got players, I guess, on one side like Denis Shapovalov, who are almost kind of up in arms, about it. Whereas it feels like you've got someone like Rafael Nadal on the complete other end of the spectrum who is going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I mean, he is quoted as saying, "I always believe in people. I know Sinner, and I don't believe he wanted to dope." I think what's interesting is that with Federer, he is bringing up the fact that he's surprised by the fact that Sinner did not, sit out. He said, I think we all trust pretty much that Jannik didn't do anything, but the inconsistency potentially that he didn't have to sit out whilst they weren't 100% sure what was going on. I think that's the question here that needs to be answered.
I agree with that, Joel. I think that's a really good point because
it's a very measured point in terms of...
It is measured.
It's like, I understand, as I say, like, I want to believe, I think we're in Jannik Sinner, and I look at him and I'm sort of in the Nadal camp of believing him. But then I'm also kind of like with Federer in terms of, but regardless, if there's uncertainty,
but both can be true, Joel, right? Both can be true. And that's the thing. If you can believe, and based on the amount that was in his system, that's what they've ruled, is that this wasn't intentional doping. So it was unintentional doping in that sense. But then that's the crux of it, is that you have responsibility. So they've ruled it out as intentional doping to try and have a performance enhancing benefit. But then you are also responsible for the failed test and how it ended up in your system. And so that's where you can probably absolve him of the fact that I don't think he wanted to dope. I think that's when feelings come in. That's also what they ruled. The amount in his system would point to that, arguably. But then the fact that the storyline that's attached to it is hard to believe. And I think that's where, legally, are we pleased as tennis fans that he is able to play? If this was a mistake, you wouldn't want to see Jannik Sinner sidelined because of the year that he's having. It would be such a big scandal and cloud over tennis. And so in some ways, brushing it under the carpet is positive for the tennis wider community. But at the same time, I think you have to fix the system, which allows it to be sometimes exploited or sort of maneuvered in a way which can actually lead very different results for people like someone who was ruled as being contaminated, Simona Halep, and someone like Jannik Sinner, who the physio, you would say, really did know, but they've said that he didn't. So it depends on where you land.
That's the thing, I think, because Federer also is quoted saying we need to trust the process, and I feel like just a lot of people just don't.
It implies that he doesn't as well, right? If he's like, we need to be able to, as opposed to we can.
We need something to rely on, and I just don't think we know what that is.
But is there a cloud though, Joel, do you think, hanging over this? Or do you think that it's been managed in a way that the final, he will be celebrated no matter what? Or do you think there will be those question marks around the way that he's been treated, not necessarily the morality of what he's done?
I still think there is like a cloud over him, and it's not clear to me yet whether this is going to be something that sort of haunts the rest of his career or whatever. But I do think the way it's been managed, and I think it feels like it's been calculated and managed meticulously, and that there was going to be no right time for this to come out. But at the same time, there was always going to be eyebrows raised whenever that happened. And to me, it feels like from the kind of the general tennis fan, the biggest kind of eyebrow raise is around the special treatment element and the fact that he is world number one. And to me, that means, there are going to be organizations that have a stake in him, like,
vested
the
interest.
ATP, vested interest, like the ATP. And as a result of that, I do think there is, I can understand why some players and people feel like, he's been given the VIP, treatment, and you can
the VIP doping lane. Yeah, it kind of is, right?
It's sort of like that. And I think that's what's so, I guess, frustrating to people is that lack of consistency, that there feels like, as you say, that it almost feels like there's a VIP lane, and if you're kind of struggling around 150, 160 in the world or whatever, then they're not going to roll out that sort of red carpet treatment. So
it's a tough one.
And I don't think that's any fault of his own. I just think that's just something that has come from this situation that I say everyone is sort of talking about. And I do feel like he's been given special treatment, but I don't think it's any fault of his own. I
And
don't
I
think
think
he was asking for special treatment.
no, I think he just had very good lawyers that did a very good job.
Mm,
And they've explained to him what would need to be said in this way. You build a case, it all makes perfect sense in that way. But I think the difference between this and some of the other people who have also been banned and had it lifted for this exact thing is also because they don't have the team. They are only responsible for themselves.
yeah.
So if they don't know, it's not like they're a medical expert. Not every player is. But ultimately, what it comes down to is Jannik Sinner is responsible for his team and what his team put in his system. And that's where the rules do get messy, because a lot of people do think that this should have resulted in a ban, but also a lot of people think that the rules shouldn't be this way.
Yeah.
So I think we can
It's
watch Jannik Sinner
unfortunate
and
because
enjoy it, though.
yeah, it's unfortunate because it's like ultimately the tennis player is the full person,
Yeah.
and it might not necessarily be his fault. Or
Yeah, that's literally what
that's
this is
it.
about,
It's
right?
that.
Yeah.
It's it. It's like yeah. It could have been his team. His team might not have known, but also at the end of the day, yeah, the player has to take the consequences. And yeah, some people will feel like Sinner did not serve those consequences because maybe he got some sort of special treatment. But you know, we shall see. I'm sure this conversation is not going to go away
No.
anytime
But
soon.
having said that, Joel, one thing that we should definitely mention is that he's been asked multiple times about how he's kept it together during this whole
Mm,
period of such spotlight on him, the allegations hanging over him for so much of the year. And you have to say, Jannik Sinner is a very resilient man. The fact that he's able to compartmentalize this and still put together
yeah.
these performances, despite what the world may think and despite all the noise, I think it just shows you that is what a world number one and a champion is made of. It's that resilience, it's that mental fortitude. And I mean, against Taylor Fritz, you're going to be taking on not just the world number one, but a seasoned, very mentally tough player, Joel.